Hello, and welcome back to J Hutch Talks Too Much. Thank you very much for coming back, watching the show. Just a reminder, if you do like what we're doing, please hit the like button on the YouTube video. And if you haven't subscribed to J Hutch Talks Too Much yet, please feel free to consider, at the very least, consider subscribing to the podcast. So today I want to go back a little bit to talking about a subject that I talked about a few weeks ago. In fact, in the introduction video, I talked a little bit about the nature of education, and a good friend of mine I saw was putting up some articles about education on Facebook. And I know that he is invested in this topic because we've talked about it before, so I thought I'd have him back. So I'm going to bring up Joe Lasko now. Hey, Joe.
Hey, how you doing?
How's it going? Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I don't know if you know this, but I just hearing you say it, J Hutch Talks Too Much, it rhymes.
Yeah. And you know what's incredible is other people have mentioned this to me. It was not planned at all.
Okay.
It was not part of the plan. And I didn't even really put it together until
I wasn't going to ask. I just figured and then I was the first one to notice it. So
no, but I guess it has worked out in some ways. Beyond what I ever intended it.
Very good. That's great.
But I say that to my students all the time, right? So in class, because I teach a lot of literature, a lot of students will say, was that the intention of what the author was? And I will say, text can do things far beyond what the author ever intended. And
the author is dead after the text goes out into the world.
I tend to not like to think of myself as the dead author of this.
You've always been half in the grave to me. So.
Well, like I think I say in the introduction video that I do, another friend of mine said that I was born 54 years old. So really, technically, that is true.
Yeah, that's right. I also just want to point out that I feel like you might be setting me up for failure here by inviting me onto this podcast, because in your introduction, at the end of your introductory podcast,
yeah,
you said this wasn't going to be a podcast about education. And I hate to tell you, but this is number 4. Is this number 4?
Well, 5? Technically, it's number 3.
You don't count you're not counting the introduction as a.
I don't know.
That's even worse. You're 3 in. You're 3 in, and you've already dedicated a whole podcast to education. So.
That's true.
I don't know.
It is the first topic we're revisiting. That is true.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that is the case. But I guess I can't escape it. I'd like to escape it on some level, but it's a hard thing to escape.
It's an inescapable thing, especially when you're an educator. So
exactly. Yeah. And so are you. And so that's a key reason why I wanted to have you come on and discuss this tonight. Now, I will say, just to give a little bit of a backstory for the folks at home, that I was just working this out today in my head, that we first met 14 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
we met in we met in an educational environment. You were doing your master's. I had just completed my master's.
That's right.
And we were both teaching at the university as teaching assistants.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was going to say, you're talking today about self-directed education. That's obviously a topic that I think that you're invested in to some degree.
Yeah.
It's a point of view that I share as well, I think. But I would say that in those years that we worked together as teachers, we didn't talk too much about that topic. I don't think we talked a lot about teaching, but we also spent most of our time, I think, talking about loss theorizing, essentially.
Well, I was going to say, when I got the text from you saying that you wanted to have me on the podcast, I thought it was going to be about Lost, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a little disappointed.
Well, someday. We might do this someday.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that we can probably steer this conversation into Lost anyway. So we might go there.
Most of the examples, hopefully, will be Lost related.
I hope so.
Yeah.
When I just related to it though, when I first met you, you had come into one of the classes to speak to the newbies, the new batch of MA students, and you were sort of giving your spiel about what you were doing and how you got through it, and you said something. You said I can't remember if I've ever mentioned this to you, but you said, "Oh, I'm not a very good reader, so I have to, there's a lot of reading, and I don't consider myself a very good reader." And I immediately thought to myself, here's a guy that I can relate to, because I too do not consider myself a very good reader. And I too am fooling the system into, for some reason they admitted me into this program. But, I was thinking about that today, and I was thinking, like, why did we not, I don't consider myself a bad reader anymore, but why did I at the time consider myself a bad reader? And I think it's a result of being a product of a system that does not value time, does not value that values sort of speed of getting through work, that essentially, in a way, is designed to weed out the those who do it the least efficiently. And if we had been truly self-directed at that point in time, we probably would have been able to see through that, and not doubt ourselves quite so much. So, I just thought that might be a nice little introduction into our conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'd forgotten about that I had come in to talk to that group, but yeah, now I remember coming in.
Yeah.
And it's a funny way of defining efficiency in some ways, right? Because I think that you're right that we do kind of privilege that kind of efficiency. But when you think about it, the efficiency that you're describing is read through the book as quickly as possible. But a lot of people can do that, but they don't necessarily understand what they were reading.
Totally.
And if that's the case, it's not really that efficient.
Right.
But it is fulfilling somebody's definition of what efficiency means.
Well, yeah, and sort of self-fulfilling our own, doubts about ourselves as well, right? Yeah. So, yet here we were, two students in a graduate program who were there because we were good readers, right. Or at the very least, we knew well enough that we could take our time with a book.
Right. Okay. Because I was going to say, I like the fact that you have revised your own opinion about yourself as a reader, because I'm not sure I have necessarily. I would probably still define myself as a bad reader. Like, for example, and I tell my students this, right? And it's partly because it's true, but it's partly because I sort of want them to feel a little bit better about their own reading experience, which is, I am the type of reader who, I'll be reading for 20 minutes. I'm now on page 10, and it suddenly occurs to me that I have not been paying attention to what's going on in this book since page 2. Yeah, and then I have to go back.
Don't you think? I totally agree, and myself as well. I will find myself doing that as well. But I think everybody does,
right?
And at least we just admit it. We actually understand that we do that.
Yes.
We don't get to to page 226 and go like, huh? Where did that come from? Because we will go back and read those. We don't just keep going.
Yes.
Right? So
much like the end of Lost season 3, we recognize we have to go back.
We have to go back. Brilliant.
I did it.
This is why I love you.
First one.
That's number one. Ding.
Yeah, mark it down. So, by the way, is that Rainbow Dash on your shoulder?
Over here? Yeah. I think that's Rainbow Dash.
I'm trying to figure out who the other one is.
Is that Twilight Sparkle?
It might be.
I'm not sure. Yeah. Now I can't get they're sitting on my shoulder.
Two other conversations. That's another conversation we didn't have back in 2008.
That's true. That's true. Well, yeah, we didn't have kids at that point.
That's right.
And yes, that is an abacus as well. That's ensuring my window doesn't get pried open because I just came back from vacation. So right before I left, I was looking for things I could put into my windows that would keep them from getting pried. So I've got a book in one, and I've got an abacus in another.
Wow. See, that's what an educator puts in their windows
That's
in
right.
order to prevent them.
If you don't have an abacus wedged in your window, you're an educator.
That's awesome. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got into this sort of idea of self-directed education.
Sure.
I mean, maybe it was something you thought of all along, but
well, I think I learned more about it as I've gone in a number of different steps. So after leaving academia and then after leaving another career and doing some soul searching, I got into nonprofit, and I worked at a nonprofit called Story Planet. I became a program director there, and it was a very cool. It's like Toronto's version of Dave Eggers' 826 writing. Yeah. So we did a lot of really cool writing programs, creative writing programs for kids. And when I was there, often, what the amazing thing was, we'd do these programs, and teachers would always come up to us afterwards, and they say, "It's crazy. This one kid who never does anything in class is like, he's the kid who's writing the most pages and drawing the most, and he's binding his own book." And these kids were getting so excited about this stuff, and we'd often say, "Yeah, for some reason, these kids who don't succeed in a typical classroom environment are really thriving here." So that was my first step, that like, okay, there's something to this. Like, there's something outside of the classroom where, kids are learning outside of the classroom, and they're not lost causes, and teachers are even like trying to figure that out. And then I joined, after having our daughter, I decided I better get a stable job. So I joined the TDSB. And I taught in a bunch of classes, and I eventually found my way to a school called Alpha 2 Alternative here in Toronto. And Alpha 2 Alternative is a school that encourages self-directed learning. It's one of the major pillars there. It's self-directed learning and consensus-based community. So this was a school within the TDSB where there were no grades, no report cards, no standard classes. The kids were basically intermingled from grade 7 to grade 12, or whatever those ages might be. And the kids came in on a daily basis, and they would decide what they wanted to do with their time. The teachers in the school, I became one of the teachers in the school. We were referred to as mentors. And essentially acted more as sort of guides or resources. When I first joined up with the school, I thought, this is a really cool place. And what happened was I spent a day supply teaching there. And a few weeks later, I got a call from the school, and they said, "Hey, we've got an opening here. Do you want to come?" And after a day, I thought, well, this is very cool. I was very comfortable in another school, and I wasn't sure I wanted to leave, but I thought, yeah, okay, let me come in and check it out. I'll come for a week or two, and then I'll make my decision. And I couldn't figure it out because I'd never seen a school like this, right? And you're not sure, okay, are these kids who just couldn't cut it in other schools? Are these kids who have sort of been bounced around and this is the last destination? And at the end of the first week, I said, I don't think I can be here because I don't know what I'm not doing any. I'm just here. Like I'm speaking with the kids. I'm building relationships, but I'm not doing anything. And the principal of the school said, "Do me a favor, come back for one more week." I said, "I think, okay, I will. I'll do that, but only until you find someone."
Hmm.
And over the weekend, I thought about it, and I came back on Monday, and at the end of the day on Monday, I said, I don't know what was I thinking. I need to be here. I just sort of, something clicked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the principal. I said, I hope you didn't post the job because I'm going to take it. She said, I knew you would. It's fine. So you're good. You've
Right.
got the job. So I spent a year at this school, and what I learned was that these were actually incredibly brave kids. These were kids who were here by choice. These were kids who had recognized for themselves that the school system was not for them. Was essentially, they sort of saw it as a conveyor belt, and it was just standardized education, and they wanted something more, and their families wanted something more. And I became so impressed by these kids, by what they would do, like day in and day out. They would take it upon themselves to say, okay, today I'm gonna learn how to write Japanese, or I'm gonna learn coding, or I ran a writing group there, and four of the we called them mentees. Four of the mentees joined the writing group, and we'd do that. Some of them would make films, some of them would do photography. Sometimes they'd come in and they'd be in bad moods, and they just want to sort of sit on their phones, or at other times they'd hang out with their friends. They just sit and talk, and what I came to realize was, like, none of that was lost time. Right. None of that was time where they should have, had their face buried in a book, or been, sitting at a desk, or it was that they understood for themselves what they wanted to do, and they understood that they had the ability to do it. So that was quite incredible. And basically what these kids would do, they'd keep portfolios of the work that they were doing and of the learning that they were doing. And even if the work wasn't completed, it'd go into their portfolio. Right. And people would say, I'd tell people about this school, and they'd say, but, what if they want to go to university? Or, like, how are they going to learn math? Or what about if they want to get a job? And my answer would be, well, if they want to learn math, they'll learn math. They self-directed themselves. Some of them did. Some of them would go on, Khan Academy or whatever it was. And which Khan Academy, by the way, is this incredible, website that teaches kids math far more efficiently than we do in the classroom.
Well, I will say, interestingly enough, because I've taught a lot of students who are in math at the University of Waterloo. And a lot of them will tell me about Khan. That's where I first learned about it.
Right. I mean,
so they're looking at it,
and these kids understand the resources that they have at their fingertips. So,
incidentally, when you describe this, school, it always makes me think of. And anybody who knows me knows that you can't really get through a lengthy conversation without Noam Chomsky coming up at some point. I'll probably bring up his name. Yeah. And so he describes his early education. For those of you who don't know him, in my opinion, I mean, he's a controversial figure, but in my opinion, he's maybe the most important figure, intellectual figure of the past two generations, I would say. Yeah. And his first school was a school like the one you're describing. He called it a Deweyite school. I don't know if John Dewey was a name that would have come up at all in your experiences, but that's what he calls it. And he says the same thing the same thing that you were saying. There were no grades. As he puts it, he didn't know he was a good student until he got to high school, because when he went to high school, that was a more traditional kind of conventional school.
Yes.
And at that point, he's being graded. And so he starts to understand what his position is in relation to other students. But he says he didn't know he was a particularly good student until that point, which is amazing when you think about it, because he transformed an entire academic field, made all these incredible contributions to scholarship, and
it's incredible.
Yeah. And then he talks about how he goes to high school, which is a more traditional, conventional school, and he hated it there. Like, it was just a completely different type of experience. And he probably thought it was one of conformity and things like that.
Imagine how repressive that would be, moving from an environment where you're a free individual to one where essentially you're just a number, right?
Yeah.
So
I do want to come back to that question about the math.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good question, but my answer to that is always, if you can put students in an environment where they learn to believe in themselves, like where they can really believe in themselves and understand like what they are able to achieve, that you can learn anything. When you can find a way to learn, like if you want to learn math, you will learn math, right? Like if you don't want to learn math, you're going to pick up the basics of, how to calculate change at a store, right? Like, I mean, I try to think, how much of the math that we learned in school do we actually remember? Those formulas that we were forced to memorize and to do it the way that it's done in the textbook. Otherwise, we don't get the marks. So, I think I would often think back on what I learned in school, and I don't know, like, I don't know if you ever do this and try to actually like think about how much of it you can actually remember. It's not a lot.
No, it's not a lot at all.
It's the stuff that was meaningful to you, and the rest of it just, I don't know. I don't believe that it has, slowly built this little thinking machine in your head, and they're just, those tidbits of information exist as like little chips in that machine that won't run if we don't have them. I don't think that's true.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I will tell my students too is, it's probably the case that a lot of them, do that thing. And maybe it doesn't happen as much anymore, but it was certainly happening 10 years ago, 5 years ago, where people would they go onto Wikipedia, they'd look something up, they go down this rabbit hole where they're clicking through and, that's interesting, that's interesting. Yeah. And they're probably learning more by doing that than they are by memorizing things for their classes. And I will often also tell them, when I was a kid, I had this very unusual interest in American presidents. I don't know what it was. I was about 6 years old, 7 years old, and I had this fixation on American presidents.
Okay.
And fortunately, my family was interested in cultivating the things that I was interested in. So if I was interested in something, they'd buy me books on it, and I would read them. So I had about, 20 books on U.S. presidents. How I ended up becoming this kind of fierce critic of power later on, I'm not entirely sure, but that's what I was interested in at the time. And I will say, probably, I would imagine to this day, I can still remember all of the American presidents in chronological order from Washington up to, I can't
believe you never told me that.
Yeah.
I was the American guy. I was the Americanist, and you
were.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. Well, it's a ridiculous thing to have done. I don't know why, but
that's great.
Actually, I do know why. I could tell you why, because I really liked Michael J. Fox from Back to the Future, and so then I watched Family Ties, and he was all into that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay, cool.
So that was my way into it.
Oh, that's cool.
But like I say, I memorized those things, and I'm not like rote memorization, I think, is a real issue. I don't think we learn that much from it, but I do think that if it's a topic that we're actually invested in, then we do retain that kind of information.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's the key, right? Is investment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. In any case, that school, that experience really, it changed me. I will say, you have moments in your life where you realize that, everything that you thought before was wrong. Again, like when Jack realizes that they have to go back. There's Jack pre that moment, and there's Jack post that moment.
That's right.
Completely different man.
That's right.
Beard. Right. And
did you grow a beard during that time?
I did have a beard during that time.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Right. In any case, so my intention was, hey, I've figured it out. Like, this is it. This is the school I'm going to teach at for the rest of my life. I'm here. This is it, man. I found it. And I bought in completely. I spent so much time thinking about it. I met this incredible woman. She's a parent of one of the kids who went there. Her name's Christina House. And she had homeschooled her kids forever. And that was the other thing. Like I came to realize that everything that I had thought before about what homeschooling was completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think there's a common assumption that, you know, homeschoolers are these sort of weird kids who don't socialize with other kids and are just, you know, like hide in their parents' closet when the doorbell rings. And,
right.
But they're not, you know, like there's these communities.
Wait a minute. That's weird.
No,
I have to reevaluate my childhood now. I'm sorry.
Anyway, you know, it changed everything. And this woman taught me so, I mean, she was my primary source of information about what all of this was. I learned about the unschooling movement and
yeah.
And in fact, she actually went on, she has started her own center here in Toronto. It's called Passages Center. It's on Ossington, and it's worth any parent checking out for their kids who are not satisfied with the school system. I actually served for the first year of the center. I served on the board, and very, very proud of her. But in any case, so I thought I'm going to teach at this school forever, and lo and behold, the end of the year comes, and I find out that they can't hire me full time, and they need to bring somebody else in. So they replaced me, and I fell into a deep depression because you have to think about what this would be like to think like I taught at the only school in the TDSB that is essentially an unschooling school like this.
Yeah.
How am I like now that I feel like school is a farce? How am I going to go back into the system? Like, how am I going to teach these kids? And I almost left teaching.
Right.
I was very close to it because, again, you know, here I was again just thinking like, wow, like I'm a number in the system. You know, I had been, you know, told by many of the kids, the parents, that I was the person the school had been looking for. You know, this school, they have to hire teachers in the TDSB, right? So yeah. Think about how hard that is going to be to find a teacher who buys into that philosophy, who, you know, when most teachers, they believe in desk learning, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I ended up getting a job at another school, and I was trying to find my way in terms of like how do I take what I believe that I've taken away from this other school and apply it into this school where, you know, with parents who don't necessarily buy into that belief, with kids who have never had that freedom before, right? And slowly I found my way. And I had to sort of shift from, you know, thinking as an unschooler to really like placing my focus on how can I get these kids to just believe in themselves and just to figure out how to do these things themselves, you know? And
right. Well, so that leads me to kind of a big question that I have, which is that I think a lot of hesitancy that some teachers would have, like you said, most people in the Toronto District School Board probably wouldn't buy into this. And I would imagine on some level, there's a kind of self-preservation issue involved there, because you hear self-directed education and you think, okay, well, what's my role in this then? Does that mean I'm finished? Is my job eliminated, or what does that mean? And I want to go back a little bit to what I talked about in my first video, which was so in my first video I talked about how or the first podcast that I did, I talked about how I looked at these tweets and how somebody said, what books would you show your students?
Yeah.
And somebody said, just show them what's popular. And I said, I think that that's a really terrible idea, because on the one hand, just telling kids to do the thing that's popular is just probably not a good message to send to kids. Yeah. And on the other hand, kids don't need to, or anybody they don't have to be kids, but people do not have to be told or directed towards things that are popular, because they're already experiencing them for the most part overwhelmingly. They're already seeing them, already experiencing them. So I think somebody could watch that video and think, okay, you said that, and now you're talking about self-directed education. Are those two things in conflict with one another? But I don't actually think that they are. So I guess on some level, what do you see of this question? Like, do you think that this means the abolishment of the teacher self-directed education?
No, I don't think so at all. I think what it means is rethinking what the teacher's role. Like, I think for one, I think and younger teachers are good at this. Older teachers, not so much. But you have to you really have to remove the ego from the teaching, right? The aspect of
which category am I in, by the way? Am I the young teacher or am I the old teacher at this point?
As I said, you've got 1 foot.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So that line. Sorry.
I think, first of all, I think what in order to allow students to self-direct, I think the first step is that you have to believe in them. Like you have to believe that they have at the stage that they're at, they have everything that they need in order to succeed in the present, right? We think so much about the future. We think so much about well, how are they going to become this, or how are they going to become that? We shouldn't be doing that. I think what we need to be doing is thinking, in the present, do these students have the tools that they need to succeed presently? And I think all students do. And again, going back to this notion of time, we believe so strongly that students should be achieving at a certain level, at a particular age. But that we know that's not we know that this is not actually the way things work.
Right.
We know that yes, if we are going to judge students against one another, then maybe that's the case because there's a certain number of students who are able to move through that conveyor belt education system because they are smart enough to self-preserve and understand that hey, if I do this, my parents will get off my back and my teacher won't yell at me. But are they really learning, or are they just retaining the information long enough to write it on a piece of paper and then moving on with it?
Yeah.
So these are two different things. The idea of self-directing your education so that you're actually learning, or or just being directed, right? Going through that system, getting good grades in school, going through the right track in high school so that you can get into a good program in a university, so that you can get a good job. Except that when you get out of university, you realize that oh, hey, this job that I've been spending my whole life moving towards, I'm realizing now, because now I am an adult and I've realized that I'm a free adult. I don't want to do that. That sounds like a fucking nightmare. Or you go into it and you're questioning every day, why am I miserable? This was all supposed to work out. Everybody told me that I'd be happy if I did this. If we can get kids thinking earlier to think for themselves and not to look for teachers and parents to direct them towards something, that's how you find. You mentioned a Chomsky quote as well about the role of the educator should be to get kids as happy about learning, as excited about learning as possible. That's how you educate, and you do that by allowing students and guiding them to have the tools to self-direct. And when I say guiding, I don't mean saying there's a difference between self-direction and self-assessment or peer assessment. Assessment and education are different. I think you have to be able to say, I'm interested in this and I'd like to pursue it, or I'm not interested in this and I'd like to pursue something else. And we need to give students that freedom.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the examples that you used, I think you were talking about Lorde and Olivia Rodrigo.
Well, don't push me on that because I still don't know who they are. But okay. Yes, that's
well. You know, I thought I was thinking long and hard about this, and I thought to some degree. Well, I typed a note to myself, and I thought my note was: is it the educator's job to expose students to new materials, or is it the educator's job to get students to think analytically about the materials that they're consuming? And I think that they're two different things. And it's a difficult question, right? Because right now I've taught university level students, I've taught high school level students, I've taught middle school level students, and I've taught primary students. I've taught students at all different ages. I was a music teacher. It's difficult, right? Because you're teaching at the university level, and right now I'm teaching at the grade 3 level, right? So
right.
We're sort of thinking of these things differently.
Yeah.
And at the university level, those students have already self-directed to say, I want to take a course on Canadian literature, or I want to take a course on music. So they've already self-directed themselves to say, like, hey, I want to learn more about this stuff.
Right.
I really like Lorde, and that would be great. Like, I would love it if you taught me about Lorde every day. But like, hey, I did sign up for a music class, and that means I'm interested in all. Like, you can see a description of the course, but there's choice there already. Mm-hmm. In a grade 3 class, there's not. These kids didn't choose to go to grade 3 in the school that they're at. They're there because that's the neighborhood that they live in, and their parents decided that they're going to go to this school.
Yeah,
so it's two very different things. But I did think about when I was a music teacher at an inner city school, teaching grades 4 to 8, and I was brought into that school because the principal there wanted to switch up the music program. It was previously a classic school music program. They were learning strings or flutes and I said, well, hey, if you buy me a bunch of MIDI controllers and some iPads and some keyboards, and I'll teach these kids how to make hip hop beats. Mm. We'll make that the program. And he said, great, let's do it, because we need to get I want to try to get these kids invested. And I came in and so I started thinking, like, okay, I'm teaching them about songwriting and what's the entry into that. So I asked them to play me some songs that they liked, and we went through some hip hop songs, some pop songs, and we started breaking down the structure of these things. And it was funny because you were talking about Marvel movies as well, and I had sort of made that comparison as well. I said, what if we think about a song in the same way as we think about a Marvel movie? That, these songs are all structured the same way. Just like if you think about a Marvel movie, there's a hero who doesn't know that he's a hero, and he goes on and he figures out he has powers, and then he thinks he's on top of the world till this villain shows up and challenges that, and he thinks he can't beat the villain anymore until somebody comes along and says you can, and then he does it. And all these kids went like, oh my God, they are all the same. And then we did that with song structure, and from that, we were sort of able to move into other types of music and major and minor. And the idea was, if we can slowly start with what the students were interested in, mm-hmm. and go from there into other types of music, the influences, the sample, like how songs were sampled, I thought we can have some success there. And we did. It was successful. But I don't know. I'm still struggling with the idea. I often think, if I hadn't shown them those songs, would they eventually find them? Probably. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the examples that you used.
I chose specifically obscure people.
Did a teacher show you Rosie and the Originals, or did you find it on your own?
I found it on my own.
Right. So don't you think that if we can just play on what students, not necessarily like exactly what the popular thing is, but something related to that, then it will do enough to continue their enjoyment of what they're learning, that they'll follow that through on that path, or they won't. And you know what, if they don't, that's okay too.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to say that if people go their entire lives without hearing Rosie and the Originals, that they're, impoverished in some way. Although Angel Baby is a fantastic song, and I once again highly recommend people listen to that. But I think I would say that the sort of strategy that you're using in that situation that you just described is the absolute right strategy for that particular situation. However, I would also say, I think that, I wonder if you would agree, although I feel like you might, that when you have walked into that particular situation, that was not at the experimental school?
No, it wasn't. No, but I was lucky enough to have a principal who allowed me to do what I wanted.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think maybe, there's a situation where it strikes me that you're now engaging with students who have been through the kind of conventional education system, and they've been demotivated by it. Yeah. So in order to kind of bring them out of that, it makes sense to start with what they know, and then start to broaden it out a little bit. So that does strike me as the right strategy in that situation. But that's only because they've been so kind of, to use that same word again, impoverished a little bit by the system, that you kind of need to do that. And I wonder if we begin right from the get-go of offering them all of these diverse experiences, and then one student will say, I like that, and another student will say, well, I like this, and another student will say, well, I like that, and to me, at least, that's how you end up strengthening their analytical abilities to deal with the things that are popular in their time, because now they've experienced all these different ideas and beliefs and different forms, and they could take that to the things that are going on within their culture.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think one of the skills that and you say this, you said this in your introduction, that a very good educator will be able to get students excited about things that they are not excited about, right? If you do it the right way. And the key to that is being alert and observing your students, right? Because the worst thing, like the thing that you don't want to do, is be that guy at the party where everybody's just trying to have a good time, is saying like, hey, check this song out. Now check this song out. Now, and everybody's just going like, man, can you just put on whatever the song is, right? Yeah. Let's make it a Rolling Stones song because of Charlie Watts.
Good old Charlie Watts. Yeah.
But I think that there is, that is the experience that most students have. You talked about the Shakespeare thing, right? I completely agree. What are we doing? What are we doing teaching 13 and 14-year-olds and Shakespeare and forcing them to read it, Shakespearean, language that they're not understanding? I didn't understand any of it.
Yeah.
I did not think of myself as a smart person until probably my last year of my undergrad.
Right.
I thought I was not smart. I thought I was fooling people. Like anytime I got a good grade, it was like, I just was able to fool them. I don't know if I told you this, but I flunked out of Brock. I went to Brock my first year. I flunked out.
Yeah.
And then I ended up back there teaching there. Right. But it took that long for me to figure out how to learn, because this system, it just teaches us to hate learning or to think that we're not good.
Yeah. Well, that's
my son is in junior kindergarten.
Yeah.
This year, his teacher was telling us like, well, I make him finish his math or his writing before he's allowed to play. And I'm going, oh, that's why my son hates you and hates school. Like he hates school. He hates it.
Right.
And she's talking to my wife and I, as she's an older one, that we should agree with it, that this is how you do it, right? And we're it's like, well, yeah, you're of that old, like, thank God you're retiring this year. That mentality needs to go. It really does.
Well, that's part of. So I was gonna offer, as just playing the devil's advocate, kind of what the objections to self-directed education are. And one of them, I think, an objection that people would have would be, if people are kind of left to their own devices, and let's broaden it beyond just kids, because I think the process of education goes, throughout one's lifetime. If people are left to their own devices, they won't educate themselves, right? They will decide not to. And we'll put aside
people are naturally lazy. Is that
it's kind of making that assumption, but I wonder if part of it is kind of what you are describing there, that it's kind of like, so I do a class at school called How Should We Be Working? It's a class that I kind of constructed, and I'll be doing it again. But one of the things that we talk about in that class is we try and talk about different models of work, ones that are not really part of in our society. And so one of them is like, what if you had a workplace where there was no boss, which is essentially a democratized workplace. Or what if you didn't have to work for a wage? What about those two options? And the common response to that is always people just wouldn't work, right? Because you need to have either that kind of financial incentive, or you need to have somebody sort of standing over you and telling you what to do. And my response to that is always to say, that's because I think you're thinking that way because you're thinking about how we think of work now.
Yeah.
And if we think about the way we work now, work is not enjoyable. If somebody wasn't paying me to do it, why would we do it? If I wasn't being paid to do it, I wouldn't. If somebody wasn't telling me to do it, I wouldn't. But you're locked into thinking about work in this way. And I wonder if in some ways, when people have been through the mill of education, that of course self-directed education sounds ridiculous, because why would you want to do that to yourself when you have free time? Right? But it's just the way we have been cultivated to think about what education is.
I couldn't agree more. And I would also say that I think we underestimate how fast we get bored. I think, like if we didn't have anything to do, sure, that'd be great for whatever. It's going to be different for everybody. A day for somebody, a month for somebody else. But at the end of that, we get bored, and we want to we naturally want to learn.
Yeah.
We naturally want about, depending on what it is, but we don't want to be told what to learn, just like we don't want to be told what to do, right?
Yeah. And I think too, it all depends on how we define what education is or what information is, because again, to go back to Chomsky for a second, he says it's always amazing to him to hear people talk about sports statistics and sports information, and people can rattle off sports statistics very easily. This guy batted this, or this person has got this many touchdowns, whereas this person in this, and that's self-education. That's something that people have gone out of their way to learn and figure out.
Absolutely.
And it all just comes down to, in a way, how we define what education is.
Well, yeah, and so going back to that school that I taught at, that was the common question. Like, well, I mean, what, are these kids just hanging out? Like, or they can watch TV on their computers there? What are you talking about? Like, that's not educate. Well, why isn't it? How much have you learned watching? Like, maybe one day they're going to decide that they'd like to write something. And that knowledge, like you and I talk a lot about how far back we go with television shows, and that you and I both learned so much about the writing process from shows that we watched when we were young. Not necessarily the shows that we're watching now, but those shows that we were watching when we had our minds were free enough that we could actually absorb what those writers were doing and get inspired by the newness of it and the And so why don't we value that? Because it's not in a curriculum, because it's not canonical. Like, why? Because there's powers that be who are telling us that, it's not valued. And I think that they're, just drawing back on this question about, the popular, agree with you. The unpopular is extremely important. I do think that if we trust that, we need to trust that kids who are interested in music will find that stuff. Kids who are interested in books will find those books, and if they don't, it's okay. But we need to more than anything, we just need to trust kids. We need to trust that, like, everything that we think as like the supreme, the whatever we hold up is it's subjective, right? It's all subjective. And that when these kids were listening to the Beatles, their teachers were saying, like, you need to be listening to this, like, that's cool, but like, check this out. So I don't know, but I think that there is if you allow for it, there's a process, and everybody will do it. I think you're absolutely right. People will naturally find a way to learn. And sorry, the last thing I'll say about that, I just wanted to say is that, now, you have employers who are not looking for university educated kids. You have employers who are looking for people who think outside of the box, who understand themselves, who can think differently, who can work efficiently. And the world is changing, and it's becoming more and more obvious, I think, to young people that that notion of just going through the system is not going to get you where you need to be. These kids in the school that I taught at, they were accepted into university. Many of them went on to universities with no grades, with no credits, because they wrote an essay and they had a portfolio of work to show what they were interested in, and they went on. Some of them went on to do very successful things. So, yeah.
Well, along those lines, let me ask my most controversial question of the night, and which will maybe take a little bit. So forgive the lengthy preamble, but it's kind of so I think another objection, which you kind of touched upon there, is what if you allow suppose, okay, so now you've got over that sort of hurdle where you say, okay, yes, students will choose to self-educate, or people will choose to self-educate if they're given the opportunity. Then the next objection is, well, what if they choose the wrong things to educate? What if they choose the things that don't adequately prepare themselves to engage in the world beyond education? So I was looking around at different things in order to prepare for this discussion, and so one of the quotes that I found that I thought was really interesting is from Woodrow Wilson, who I could tell you, of course, was an American president. And he was...
I'm glad you're keeping it current. That's
he was a World War I era president. Okay. Now, yeah, exactly. But I do think that this quote, in some ways, I don't think people would outright say it in this way today, but I think that it still kind of holds true. So he said in a speech that he gave, he said, we want one class of persons to have a liberal education. And what he means by that is basically like a liberal arts education, essentially, where you're getting taught literature, you're getting taught music, you're getting taught classics, you're getting taught all those kinds of things. But he goes on to say, okay, so we want one class of persons to have a liberal education. And we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity in every society, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult manual tasks. And he refers later, very quickly after that, to that much larger class of people. He refers to them as skillful servants of society.
Right.
Now, I think when people say, what if people, when they have the opportunity to choose for themselves the type of education they want, they don't choose the necessary things, that they're really saying, and they probably don't even consciously, they wouldn't admit to this, or they wouldn't consciously say this, but they're really saying, how come people are not making themselves out to be servants for society?
Yeah.
Basically, people who go out and really make money for other people, essentially, business owners and things like that. And so I think in many ways that's how what they see the education system is. It's about turning people into these servants, basically.
Totally.
And I wonder if on some level, I mean, you are mentioning that, you know, society is in some ways changing, but I wonder if in order for this to really work, you need to also kind of reorganize society in some way. And maybe it's already starting to reorganize a little bit, but reorganize society in a way that, you know, it's not about becoming a servant. It's not about, you know, simply going out there and doing this 9-to-5 job to get a wage so that the person who owns the business can make millions and millions of dollars or something like that. I don't know. What do you think?
So you're talking about like a revolution, like in education? Is that what you're talking about? Like when you say for this to work, what do you mean?
Yeah, in order for it to work for people just in general,
right.
Because I do think, you know, on some level, you know, my interests have always been, you know, the arts. You know, I'm much more interested. I'm more interested in literature and music and movies than I am in science. It's not that I'm not interested in it at all. It's just not something that I'm intellectually pursuing that often. But I also recognize at the same time that that has significantly limited my options.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing well, but I'm doing well in the limitations that I have.
Yeah, you're also a minority of people who are doing well who significantly limited their options, right?
Right. That's right. So I wonder if, you know, what's, you know, beyond this, there's a kind of a, you know, self-directed education, but, you know,
well, here's the thing.
Where it's like a self-directed life to some degree.
I think that there's often that often when we think about self-directed education, we only think about it in terms of I'm self-directing towards choosing what I want to learn and when.
Yeah.
But I think that there's I think that we could think about self-directed education in greater terms, meaning I understand how I'd like to learn and am open to all forms of learning. And I think that if we can spend much more time as educators at younger ages focusing on having students harness their love of learning rather than forcing them to learn certain things, it will be much more likely to learn all things. So just like you said, you've been much more inclined towards the arts. Well, that's because, you know, that stuff spoke to you, or, you know, maybe you had teachers who, you know, sparked something, or, you know, whatever it may be. But if at a very early age, we have teachers who allow us to be who we are and to learn at our own paces, then I think that you and I could very well be making films at the same time as we're, I don't know, you know, like solving complex mathematical equations, or, you know, whatever it might be. I think that it will take, that's the revolution that it will take. It will take a supreme rethinking of what a curriculum actually is. But that's not, we both know that's not going to happen, because that will not create, you know, this class of servants, right? Like that's never going to, that is what the school system is designed to do. It's designed to streamline servants and streamline, you know, intellectuals, or whatever it might be, or businessmen, or it's designed to make us think that we are meant to be one thing, right? We're teachers now talk about growth, you know, in reinforcing growth mindset amongst kids, but that's jargon. We're not truly doing that, you know, like until we're allowing kids the freedom to you know, like opt out of an assignment. Like we're forcing kids to like, we've got boxes and check marking every single, did they submit every page?
Mm-hmm.
Not thinking about like, why maybe did they not submit this page, or talking to them about that and letting them know that, hey, like, that's okay. Okay. Like, let's try this other math assignment, or, it doesn't mean that you got a D in math. It doesn't mean you're not a math. I can't tell you my whole life. I said, I'm just not a math person.
Yeah.
I took a course from this amazing woman at Stanford. Her name's Jo Boaler, and it was about teaching growth mindset in mathematics. And I had this epiphany, like, whoa, like that's not like, I had always said like, oh, that's just not the way my mind works. Well, science shows that's not true. Like, why are we telling kids? Why have we spent our lives being told that like, hey, your mind is just not a mathematical mind. You tend to think on the left side of your brain more than the right, or whatever it might be, when that's bullshit.
Yeah.
And again, it's driving students in certain directions. And it really, like, I can get worked up about it and say like, that's actually criminal. It's criminal to make, to get kids thinking this way about themselves. And it's really sad. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know I think what it will take is brave young teachers coming into the system, understanding that like, hey, like, it's not true. And unfortunately, what you get is, for the most part, teachers coming into the system never having done anything else. Yeah. I was really lucky that like I got my teaching degree before I got my master's in 2007. I didn't start teaching until, I don't know, like 2015, 2014, like in the TDSB. So I did a lot of other things, and I could see the world. But
well, that comes back to that point too. Like I mentioned Humboldt in the in that introduction. Actually, here's the book here. But also Humboldt was a
Humboldt.
What's that? No, no, different guy. A slight variation on the name, but he was an education reformist as well. So he was very much invested in some of these ideas too. But he makes that point about I'm just looking for the quote, the variety of situation. Right, people need a variety of situation in order to develop their powers to the fullest extent. And there are teachers, like you're saying, current teachers who haven't had that variety of situation. They've had one experience of education. They only know one way of doing it. You have had a larger variety of those situations. So you can see the possibilities.
Right. So it's almost like that should be a requirement. Go and do something else. Learn something. Learn a new thing. That was something that I did as well. Was like I when I was teaching at this school, I decided I'm going to learn a new instrument, and I just learned how to play the flute, and I did it in front of the kids, and it was mind blowing, reminding myself what it was like to learn a new instrument, and it was so, it was awesome. It was so rewarding, right? Like that, and it made me remember. Wow, like there's still moments in life where you have this spark and you go like, I didn't think I'd ever be able to play the flute. I can do anything. Nice. And all I did was I learned how to play a couple songs on a flute, but
can you get the flute now?
I don't have a flute here. I wish I could. Yeah.
I was gonna say if you what we should have done is we should have prepared a thing where you played the flute, like a nice jazzy flute bit, and I listed off all 46 presidents at the same time. Next time we'll do that.
We want to ensure that people are going to tune back in for the next podcast.
All right, that's coming.
So we'll definitely say that we'll do that, which will definitely bring them back.
I think we have to. We have to at this point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there was something that you said. Oh, yeah. So, and along with that variety of experience, another fact that I kind of discovered, well, I rediscovered it. I knew this, that back in the 90s, late 90s, when Ontario was going under significant changes in its education system. You were born, I think, the same year I was, maybe. You're a 1980 guy?
No, I'm 79. but
Okay.
November of 79.
November 79.
Very
So we're less than a year apart. So
Yeah.
you remember that time well.
Yeah.
And I one of the many changes that were made to education at that time, one of them was that the number of courses that were being offered in Ontario went from 1,400 to 200. Now there's a case again where it's clearly about we're offering all of these courses. Students are making the wrong choice,
Right.
and they're not training themselves to be servants. They are making all these wrong choices.
We're in big trouble.
We're in trouble.
We got to cut the courses. Cut the course load.
Cut the course load.
Yeah.
I remember Canada is having economic problems at that time, and so that's part of the reason that was driving these changes in the first place. And that was one of the things, right? Let's shrink the amount of courses that we have that we're going to offer students. And I think that that's certainly what's behind that.
They just did it again.
Right.
Like two or 3 years ago, they just shrunk it again.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think that's totally what's behind it.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, wow, if they were offering that many courses before, what was the impetus behind that? Like, what was the thinking behind that? Because there was a thinker at that time to say, like, we need to get a wide breadth of offerings to these kids, because that's how they're going to learn. Yeah. Yeah.
And now, if you look, I mean, I can only speak to my own experience, and I'm not at a university that's known for its English department, but certainly nobody's taking English. And even back in the day when we were at Brock, students were asking me all the time, why should I take an English major? Like, what is the point of this? And honestly, that was only about 7 years after I started to take English to my undergrad. And I don't remember ever thinking that. Yeah. And I don't remember, like, I knew that there were some people certainly who were saying, is that a good thing to take? But overwhelmingly, we all feel good about our choice. And it struck me that it was only a short amount of time, but I was on the tail end of those 90s, that shift. Yeah. And then within about 5, 6, 7 years, you started to see people saying, why am I taking this? And now we're at the time where universities all over the place, their English departments are dwindling significantly. I was just talking to a guy the other day, talking to a friend of mine yesterday who did a study, and he said that University of Toronto, which has a good education English program, their numbers went down something like 38%, and they have 38% to lose, but not every university does. Is how he framed it.
It's don't you? Yeah, I mean, it's because people think about universities as gateways to careers, right? Which they are. That is what they are.
That is what they are. Yeah.
For me, it wasn't what it was. I mean, really, I guess like way back, it was that. But really, what it should be is a gateway to thinking, like to opening up your ways of thinking. Unfortunately, people don't have that luxury, right? Because it's expensive, and you say, I've got to get a job by the time I'm 25, otherwise I'm a loser, because there's no way I'm going to be able to retire by this. Everybody's living for essentially retirement. It's not a surprise, right? Because you think in high school, you've got like you had OAC, I had OAC, right? But you think about that, and they took your 6. They looked at 6 courses of your
that's right.
Grades. You had 2 chances to fail. If you didn't want to take a spare period, which like everybody is obviously taking a spare, you had no chances of failing. Like if you screw up one of those classes, or you experiment with something that maybe you might not be good at, like, you're discouraged from that. Like, take the stuff that you're going to get the good grades at, because otherwise you're not going to get into school. Yeah. I mean, it really, when you really start looking at all of these things, you really do start to realize that, yes, this school system is not designed for self-direction. Yeah. It's not designed for experimentation. It's not designed to get you to be a free thinker. It is designed to get you to believe that you are a certain type of person, and that's the type of work that you should do.
Yeah. But just to go off of that, what you were saying before, and I don't mean to take it to these extreme places. Yes, I do. I mean to take it to these extreme places.
Do it.
Which is that just in general, I would say society is not well equipped for self-directed learning, because we have, the fact that it is, people have these material concerns, right? They do have to get a job, and and overwhelmingly, increasingly, they're becoming much lower paying jobs. Or people are in competition for the smaller and smaller
people are spending more and making less.
Yeah.
Right. Like essentially trapping themselves more and more and shrinking their options more and more.
Yeah.
Right? It is a society. I mean, we're really getting into, like a discussion of, power politics here.
Well, that's another podcast. We'll get to that. We'll get to that on another one. But
essentially, it is enough to enrage you and go, well, yeah, it's not fair. And for you and I who have kids to look at our children and to say, man, like what can I do to help you avoid that way of thinking? And if I help you avoid that way of thinking, how can I help you survive?
Yeah.
It's not just, let's get you to be afraid, like, let's get you to understand how this works. But like, once I do that, I'm opening a can of worms, because there's a chance that like, I'm really fucking you up. Like, you're not going to make a dime. And I'm sorry, you're going to end up on the street because of what I taught you.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, isn't that horrifying?
Yeah. Well, that's why when people do ask that question, if people do decide to self-direct their own education, what if they choose the wrong things? And I said, what's behind that really is like, what if people decide not to make themselves into servants? But at the same time, it's an understandable question to ask, right? It is an understandable question, because for many people, becoming a servant is their only way of surviving this world. So it's a big question. So it really is it's a topic that needs a much larger conversation, I think.
Well, the question is, here's the question, is not as an educator, but as a parent.
Yeah.
How do you reinforce your child's desire to self-direct their learning when you know that they are essentially forced to go through a system that does not reward, for the most part, self-direction?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can talk about this as educators, and you and I can both say, like, we value self-education, and we try to get self-direction, and we try to get our students to self-direct as much as possible. We steer them, and we reward that. Mm-hmm. But as parents, what do you do? Because I have no idea. Like, I can't go into my kid's school and say, I want that teacher.
No. Yeah.
Because I know the type of teacher that one is.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a nightmare year for a kid. It really is. It's a conundrum, and it is something that I think about every single day of my life.
Well, I'll tell you what. A story on that. A few years ago, I was tutoring my friend's son, and he's a very smart kid, very, very smart kid. And the first time we got together to talk, we were talking about, because I was tutoring him for his high school English class. And the first time we got together and talked, I said, let's kind of think beyond the kind of 5-point or the 5-paragraph, 3-point essay, right? Yeah. So if you've been through the typical English class in high school, it is like you do introduction, your thesis statement has 3 points, your first paragraph is that first point, second paragraph is the second point, third paragraph is the third point, conclusion. Again, going back to this idea of self-directed education and like, what would people do it? Like, again, I tell my students who say I hate writing essays, I said, if that's the essay that I was told to write all the time, I'd also hate it, because that sounds awful. Yeah. But I was telling him this, and then the next week he comes with his assignment and he shows it to me, and the teacher has spelled out what they want them to do for the essay, and it's the 5-paragraph.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
So I said to him, look, I mean, I stand by what I said last week. I think that's a good way of thinking about it, but you're going to have to kind of play the game,
right? In
this particular case.
Yeah.
Partly it's good to know that it's a game.
No, it's bullshit. No, it's a bullshit game.
Exactly. And that helps.
Yeah, I think it does. And I totally agree.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say that's not problematic.
It's not the solution. Yeah. It's not the
telling your kids that they're going to have to spend, 15 years of their lives playing a game.
Yeah.
It's just, unless you're lucky enough to get a good teacher, it's just,
I know.
It's awful.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So.
It's terrible, and it also just reinforces. I mean, to bring it to these larger things, it just sort of reinforces subservience in a way, because all you're doing is saying, "Look, I know that this is crap, but
that's absolutely
you're telling me to do it, therefore I have to do it.
Yeah.
I might as well." It reminds me too. One other thing, I frequently say to my students, I say, because I do this anti-authoritarian rap with them sometimes, and I say, one phrase that I try to avoid with my child is 4 words that I often hear a lot of parents say, and I don't condemn them for it, like I don't criticize them for it, but I would just never say it to my own child. Yeah. I said, I think it's 4 words that I think are not good words to say to your child. Does anybody know what they are? And somebody put up their hand once and said, "I don't love you." I said, well, that's not what I was thinking, but yeah, those are not good words.
Yeah, you don't say that. Yeah.
I won't say that this is worse than that, but the phrase is, do you know what the phrase is?
No, what is it?
Because I said so.
Yeah, because I said so. Yeah. I've actually taught my kids that anytime they hear that or because that they have to question it further.
Yeah.
Further.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think I've and they'll call me on it. I'll say, they'll say, because isn't a reason.
Yeah.
And I'll say, you're totally right. I was being lazy there.
Well, that's good that you teach them to do that, because you're right. That's one of the reasons why I wouldn't criticize other people for doing it, because I think we all kind of slip into it sometimes.
Well,
we're all capable of doing that. But
we're exhausted. Like parenting is exhausting.
Yeah.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
When they're asking you questions all the time, and it's just like you need to go to bed. I don't know. You just have to do it. You have to do it. Okay, you have to go to bed, because if you don't go to bed, then I can't get the junk food out of the cupboard that I eat when you're sleeping, and I really want it right now. So just go to bed.
I wonder if that would work.
Yeah, it might. It might. I think my daughter Zola would say, like, okay, I totally understand that. That's
really?
My daughter Zola would say, like, that's why I wake up before you guys, because I also eat that junk food when you're not around. So
amazing
game. Today, I am going to bed.
See, if I was a kid, I'd say, all right, let's cut a deal, because I've just heard that there's junk food in the house.
Right.
So if I get a little bit of that junk food now.
Yeah. Give me some of that junk food. Yeah. Otherwise, there's no fucking way.
The next 2 hours are going to be unpleasant for both of us.
I would be proud. I would. At the beginning of the year, last year or 2 years ago, my daughter Zola had this younger teacher, and I said to her, she's pretty. I'm just going to let you know, she's pretty defiant, but we really like that. So we don't want to kill that. Like, let's.
Right. We don't want you to curb.
And they ended up moving Zola into another class 2 months later. Because the teacher had taken a toy from another kid and put it on her desk, and then like half an hour later, the teacher saw the kid with the toy again and went over and said, "Did you take that off my desk?" And she said, no, Zola gave it to me. So she went over to Zola and said, Zola, did you take that toy off my desk? And Zola said, yeah, it's not yours. I gave it back to her because it's not yours. And the teacher called me with this, and I said, that's great. And I could tell right there that was not the response.
That wasn't the answer she was looking for.
That wasn't what she was expecting. But I love that shit. I love it.
I mean,
I love it in my students. When my students call me on my, I'm never prouder. I'm never prouder when they're brave enough to speak up for themselves.
Yeah. Well, that again, to bring Chomsky back up for the 5th time tonight, it's been more Chomsky than lost, I have to say. But
that's okay.
But to bring Chomsky back, you know, he says education typically selects for obedience.
Absolutely.
And so that's what it's training you to be, is to be not just a servant, but an obedient servant.
Yeah.
So obviously it's a big issue. Maybe we're not done with it, but maybe you could come back sometime and talk about it.
I would love to. Just before we wrap this up, I thought we could really quickly.
Please tell me you have the flute. Please tell me the whole time.
No. I thought we could think about which Lost characters were self-directed learners.
Oh, well, I think there's definitely I know who number 1 is right off the bat.
Who?
Okay. Do you have a piece of paper in front of you? Here's what we're going to do.
Okay.
Now there's people who are only hearing this rather than seeing it. So
okay.
But what we're doing now is I'm writing one name down who I'm sure was definitely a self-directed learner. And I don't know if we're going to be in agreement on this, but I feel pretty good about my choice. And then once it's up, we'll reveal it. I don't know if this is going to go up in reverse, like mirror wise or not, but we'll go on 3 and we'll show it. And then, okay, 1, 2, 3. So we'll say, so I put up John Locke, and Joe put up Sawyer. It's a good choice. But you see, and I can see that because you loved Sawyer, right? Sawyer was your favorite character.
I don't know if you can see this, but I'd written a list, and I said Locke became self-directed.
Okay, yes, yes.
On the island,
right.
Just as Jack did. Jack was not a self-directed learner, but became self-directed.
Yes.
I had Sawyer and Kate were definitely self-directed, and I had Ben ?
Yes, I thought you were going to say Ben. That's what I was going to say. But I can see that. Although Ben is too much of an authoritarian himself. I feel like to be self-directed. Yeah. But
bring it back.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that was amazing. It all comes back to Lost.
Yeah.
But
this was fun.
This was great. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me. I hope I didn't just ramble.
No, it was fantastic. It's exactly what I was looking for.
Great.
So so I do hope you come back.
Hey, I'm a product of the system. I aim to please.
Just like we've been saying the whole time, the system does work.
The system works.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. Is there any?
No.
Do you need to plug anything? Do you want to?
I don't. No. I don't need to plug anything at all.
Right.
Well, check out the Passages Center for self-directed learners. Passages. That is one that I would encourage anybody in Toronto to check out.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for coming on. Hope to see you again. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Jesse. Great chatting.
Great chatting. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.